Hi, and welcome back to Ultimate Recaps. Today I will recap the story of a military and science fiction film from 2011 called Captain America, the First Avenger. The story begins somewhere in the middle of the Arctic. Some scientists and other researchers find an airplane stuck in the middle of the ice, and once they look inside it, they discover a very valuable artifact that has been frozen for almost 100 years, so they alert the general about their findings. We are then taken back to 1942 in Norway, Germany. A man called Johann Schmidt, a German army officer and commander, who had captured a man to find out where the mysterious artifact of Odin's treasure was located. The treasure was called the Tesseract. The captured man had created a fake Tesseract to fool anyone who might come seeking for it, but the officer found out it was fake and proceeded to find the real artifact hidden within the wooden door. After the officer takes the device, and we are then taken to the Brooklyn military registration camp during the middle of World War II. Over at the Brooklyn Army Enlistment Office, a young man named Stephen Rogers volunteers himself to sign up to go into the Army, to defend his homelands and to become a man just like all the others. However, Steve is about half the size of everybody else and has a bunch of different illnesses and diseases. On top of all that, Steve has recently lost both his parents, so he's also an orphan, so he lives a pretty lonely and saddened life. He's so pathetic that the Army refused him as they see him as a liability. He respects everyone who is fighting for their country, and his only wish is to do the same. Steve also hates bullies and has no fear of standing up to them, but because everyone is always much bigger than him, his confrontation mostly leads to him being beaten up and thrown around like a rag doll, but Steve can still take it like a man. Steve does have one best friend named Bucky Barnes, who sticks up for him whenever the bullies try to fight Steve. However, Bucky will be leaving to go to war tomorrow, so Steve will be left behind to fend all by himself. As Bucky will be gone for quite some time, they decide to spend one last night together by doing a double date at a science expo. When they meet the two pretty girls, none of them are interested in Steve, and both are into Bucky. At the science expo, they are watching a presentation by Mr. Howard Stark, who shows a flying car design, but it fails. However, the people are still impressed by this futuristic design. While Bucky watches the Stark Expo, Steve can't help but notice a sign to join the Army and tries to enlist once again, making this the 5th time he's tried to join. Bucky tracks him down and wants Steve to join him on the double date and to go to the final dance before he leaves, but Steve, once again, is only interested in joining the Army and wants to find a way to get enlisted, but Bucky tells him it's pointless and that he's better off forgetting about it since he's tried so many times. But Steve refuses and said that he needs to do his part alongside the other men who are out there risking their lives for their country, and he won't feel the same if he doesn't get to join Bucky on going to the war. So eventually Bucky agrees and wishes him luck on his 5th time on trying to join, and then he leaves to finish his date. Their conversation is overheard by a strange scientist named Dr. Abraham Erskine. Steve tries to undergo an examination to see if he's fit enough to join the Army, but at that moment, Dr. Erskine comes in to ask him many questions about the war, and he seems really intrigued by Steve as he's so small, but yet so eager to join the war. He asks Steve why he wants to kill the Germans, but Steve responds, saying he doesn't want to kill anyone at all, but his only problem is that he hates bullies, and it doesn't matter which country they are from. The doc gives him Category A to officially recruit Steve and then leaves. Meanwhile, Schmidt and his assistant scientist Sola use the Tesseract to harness its energy, and the experiment goes well, meaning they can now use the power of the Tesseract to complete their weapon designs and win the war with overpowered technology that the other side don't have. Private Rogers and other recruits are in a military camp, doing some basic training, and here is where they meet Agent Peggy Carter. She quickly makes it clear to the soldiers who is in charge, and here is also where we meet the Colonel Chester Phillips. The doctor has somehow created a special serum that can transform anyone into a super soldier, giving them super strength, speed, and healing abilities like no other. He explains how this can only be done one time on one person and no more after that. And he thinks Steve is the right type of person he can use this on, as he checks all the right boxes, and is someone who will appreciate and deserve to have such transformation and use it for the good of the country. Peggy thinks this will be the right choice as she sees how determined Steve is despite his shortcomings, and Steve always pushes on no matter how much he lacks in certain fields. However, the Colonel doesn't like Steve and thinks there's no point trying to train a weakling like Steve, and using the serum on him would be his total waste of time and money. Instead, he thinks they should just buff someone up even more, and the Colonel suggests doing the project on a guy called Private Gilmore Hodge, a normal-looking soldier, already strong and brave, and who will be the right fit to do the project, and thinks he should be the one to become the super soldier. The Colonel tries showing the doctor how Steve is just a scared and skinny little guy by throwing a dummy grenade on the ground, expecting Private Hodge to be the only one to protect everyone from it. However, Steve was actually the one who reacted and tries to warn the other soldiers to get back, while laying on top of the grenade. After that, Steve wanted to ask the doctor why he chose him to be the one to do the super soldier project, as the doctor can clearly see how all the others are much bigger and stronger than him, so even Steve worries that this opportunity would be wasted on him. But the doctor explains that Steve should be the super soldier, as the other attributes like muscles and height don't matter, and what really matters is that Steve has a strong heart and he's willing to keep helping others, even though the world has been rough on him his whole life, and that's what really counts for the doctor, as he's only willing to give someone like that the serum. After, the doctor talks to Steve about Schmidt, who conducted an experiment on himself to become a superhuman using a similar serum that the doctor made. The serum did work, but many other side effects appeared as Schmidt was an evil man with an evil heart, so the serum could not amplify the good parts well enough. After this, Steve goes to the procedure to become the first American super soldier. On his way there, he tells Peggy that in almost every one of these alleyways he's been beaten up. They come to a secret store, and Peggy gives her the password to enter the underground laboratory. Steve undergoes the procedure with the doctor and is all done by Mr. Howard Stark. After injecting Steve with the blue serum, the container closes and Howard Stark uses the wheel to bring the power to 100% to get the maximum amount of transformation into Steve. After some time, the container glows and eventually Steve completes the procedure and he has been transformed beyond recognition. Peggy and the others come back down from the booth and are shocked to see the skinny boy has now grown into a gym freak body and his height has been doubled. But the overwhelming joy of the successful experiment is now darkened, as an inside man who was working for Schmidt instantly kills the doctor, and he done this from orders of Dr. Zola and Schmidt to take the special serum sample so they can make super soldiers like Steve for themselves. After the man runs away, Steve tries to help the doctor, but the man tells him to always remember who he is, and Steve goes after the imposter. Peggy was the first one there, and she manages to detain him a little by killing the driver. But the man comes back to try and kill Peggy, but Steve moves her out of the way. After, Steve goes into battle mode and runs after the mysterious man. His speed is now enhanced and he can scale walls and jump over high fences. He notices how strong he is and starts to jump from car to car in order to catch the man. He finally catches up to the man who was about to leave in a submarine, but he hijacks the vehicle and sends him up to the surface. The man said that he works for a secret organization called Hydra, and before he dies he tells Steve, "Hail Hydra." Hydra is the main enemies that work for Schmidt and are the ones who plan to use the Tesseract and other advanced technology to win the war and take over the world. Schmidt is approached by other men that are in charge of the German force, and after talking to Schmidt, they conclude that he has gone mad, as Schmidt explains how he wants to use these advanced weapons to destroy countries to the ground and thinks of himself as some kind of god. After harnessing the power of a Q, he kills all the generals. After, some doctors are seen taking samples of Steve and checking the performance of the super soldier invention prior to the death of Dr. Erskine. They want to know whether it's possible to produce more creations of the super soldier. On the other hand, the Colonel is surprised that the thief was able to intrude and get into the secret lab, and they also try to understand what technology was used to make the submarine that he tried to escape in, as Mr. Howard Stark is known as the world's best engineer, and even he said that these type of machines are yet to be created, and they don't have this type of technology yet. After discussing who might have made the design, Peggy tells everyone that this submarine is a vehicle belonging to Hydra, otherwise known as the Secret Organization of Germany, and adds that they have the most brilliant scientists in the world who are trying to create mass weapons of destruction. The Colonel tells them all that they will leave now, and their mission is to attack Hydra, and they must locate them before they assemble an army and create even more weapons that could change the fate of the war. After Steve hears about what Hydra is capable of, he immediately wants to help the army take them down. However, the Colonel doesn't think it's wise to put Steve on this mission, as he is only an experiment, and they don't know if he's ready, as they know so little about what he's able to do yet. After, a man tells Steve that his only option right now is to be a mascot for the American people and help raise money and awareness around the country. So they decide to call Steve Captain America. They want him to be a TV star and help attract a large number of volunteers to the army. He appears in films and advertisements, dressed up in a blue and red costume, and even comics are printed of him. Steve quite likes it, but he still thinks he's better than all this and wants to be a real soldier. On the other hand, the real soldiers do not accept him as a real soldier or a captain and ask him to stop performing. Just then, Peggy arrives and says that he's built for more than this, and he can't spend his time during the war being a dancing clown for the army, and that he needs to somehow find a way to put his new abilities and strength for something more. After Peggy mentions that recently Hydra almost completely destroyed the 107th troops, so Steve, after hearing this information, remembers that Bucky Barnes, his best friend, was part of the 107th force. He kindly asks the colonel for more details and if Bucky was still alive, but the colonel tells Steve that he can't give orders and that his friend is probably dead already. Steve refuses to back down and decides to go find Bucky all himself and try to rescue what remains of the 107th. Peggy and Howard Stark help Steve get as close to the Hydra base as possible. They fly overhead and Steve jumps out of the plane and then parachutes to the ground. He sneaks into the back of an enemy truck, eliminating a few guards, and gets into the German base. He continues to sneak past security while taking down the soldiers in his way, and he finally manages to get into their lab, where he finds the prisoners and frees them all. Unfortunately, Bucky isn't among the other prisoners, so Steve goes on to find him while many of the other prisoners fight the Germans using their high-tech weapons and tanks. Schmidt realizes that a super soldier is among them, and that Steve knows too much about their base, so Schmidt self-destructs the facility to not give anything away. Steve eventually finds Drzola running away from the secret laboratory, and inside is his friend Bucky. After saving Bucky, they both try to exit the exploding building and finally catch up to Schmidt and Drzola, who are trying to escape. Schmidt and Steve enter into a fight, and here is when Schmidt shows the side effects of his serum experiment. After, he tells Captain America about the same doctor using the same serum on him, but he is much stronger and will use his enhanced features to become a godlike being, and wants Steve to join him instead of helping everyone instead. After some talk, they both leave an elevator and Steve can't cross the bridge in time. Steve returns to the camp and becomes a true American hero, having proven that he is worthy of fighting and that his skills prove in battle. The colonel is glad that Steve disobeyed his initial orders and managed to pull off what no other soldier could in the matter of one day. Now he is planning a new operation and wants Steve to form a group to take down Hydra. After Steve returns, the women in the camp are thirsty for him, and one takes him for a little smooch, making Peggy jealous. After Steve gets a new shield made of vibranium created by Howard Stark, the strongest, lightest, and rarest metal on Earth. After creating the team, they take a few soldiers, along with Steve and Bucky, who lead them to many different Hydra bases around the world and takes them down. Finally, Steve has become the soldier he always wanted to be. After dealing with the bases, their next target was to hijack a Hydra train, which they managed to get inside of by using a zip line. Steve and Bucky get separated on the train, and Steve comes across a pretty strong soldier carrying 2 giant guns. He manages to deal with him, but Bucky gets cornered, so Steve helps him out, and together they defeat the train guards. However, just as they think they're all safe, another soldier comes out of nowhere and tries to blast them, creating a hole in the side of the train. Steve manages to block his attack and uses his shield to take him down. However, Bucky is now holding onto the side of the train. Steve does everything he can to save him, but the railing snapped and Bucky falls into the middle of nowhere, hundreds of feet below. Even though Captain America lost his best friend, the mission was still a success and the train is then captured, and so is Drzola, who is taken prisoner. The colonel talks with Drzola, who ends up snitching on Schmidt, and Zola informs the colonel that Red Skull's plan is to strike immediately, and his target is the whole world. Using rockets that will target each country, and he will do this using a high-tech aircraft located in the mountains and will be ready to launch soon. Steve is seen mourning his friend and crying about Bucky's death. He tells Peggy that he will not stop until all of Hydra is dead or captured. They find out that Schmidt is in the last Hydra base located high up in the Alps. Steve gets word of Schmidt's location and heads there right away using a brand new motorcycle and takes out some soldiers near the base entrance. After, the motorcycle crashes into the main door and blasting the door open so they can head inside. He tries his best to take them all by himself, but there are just way too many soldiers and they end up capturing Steve and take him to Schmidt, who starts to beat him up and tries to end the history of Captain America right then and there. However, his friends who were on the way zipline into the building and manage to help Steve defeat some enemy soldiers. After seeing this, Schmidt runs away like a little girl and Steve chases after him. At this moment, the colonel orders his men to attack the base from below, and a full-out war begins between the Americans and Hydra soldiers. Schmidt comes to realize that his plan is coming to an end, but still has a few missiles left to destroy some large cities, so he takes the Tesseract and fires up the ship to escape the fortress. While the ship takes off, Steve tries his best to run after it, but he isn't fast enough. But Peggy and the colonel arrive just in time, using Schmidt's insanely fast supercar. They get enough speed and catch up to Schmidt's ship, and Captain America gets inside. Once inside the ship, the remaining Hydra guards try their best to finish Steve off, but they couldn't stand a chance, and eventually he gets into the cockpit of aircraft and locates Schmidt, who is using the Tesseract energy weapon against Steve. They get into another fight and also crash landing the plane, but Schmidt uses the autopilot function and continues to fight on. He uses his pistol against Steve, but he throws his shield perfectly at the Red Man, and thus making him fly backwards into the Tesseract machine, and this causes some kind of malfunction. Schmidt picks up the Tesseract and tries to fix the problem, but the cube burns through his hands, so he should never have messed with it in the first place as it's too powerful. Moments after, it starts to form a wormhole right into space, and Schmidt gets sucked up into the abyss. After Schmidt was eliminated, Steve has to direct the ship into the water before it reaches New York. Peggy tries to find another way to stop the ship, but Steve tells her that there's no other way and says his final goodbye and begins descending the aircraft into the water below and crashes into the middle of nowhere, saving the world but sacrificing himself. World War II is over and the world is happy, but after searching for several years, Captain America's body or the ship he crash-landed has still not been found and was seen to be lost somewhere in the ice. However, roughly 70 years later in the 20th century, a group of modern-looking scientists were strolling in the Arctic and came across Schmidt's ship and also Captain America, who was buried in their ice but was still alive. They take Steve to a hospital, and he eventually wakes up after being frozen for 66 years. They tell him that he's in New York and give him the time and date, but Steve knew the nurse was lying, so he breaks out of a box that they kept him in, and he is then greeted by a new and modern world. It was previously 1945 when he was asleep, but he has now been woken up in the future, and it is now the year 2011. After, Coach Carter arrives with a bald head and an eye patch and tells Steve Rogers that he's been in the ice, sleeping for almost 70 years, and then the story ends. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more movie recaps, please make sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel with notifications turned on so you never miss a future video. And until next time, guys, take care.